So, what's a T-Roc? Well, the answer is it's Volkswagen's answer to the Nissan Qashqai, or I should say one of its answers, because we already have one, which is the bigger, more expensive, very, very practical Tiguan SUV. The T-Roc sits underneath the Tiguan. It's more closely aligned with the Qashqai in terms of size, overall size at any rate, and price. But it is less practical than both the Tiguan and its Nissan competitor. It is going for design and sort of a heart-tugging emotional quality to try and lure in the buyers. That's certainly what Volkswagen says. It is also effectively the replacement for the old Scirocco Coupe, and that, I have to say, is a profoundly sad thing to point out. Why? Because we loved the Scirocco. You may not have done. In fact, you probably definitely did not do, because very few people bought them, and that's why Volkswagen isn't making them anymore, and that's why Volkswagen is making and is going to make an awful lot of these T-Rocs, because everybody wants an SUV, everybody wants a crossover. So while there's nothing wrong with the T-Roc in and of itself as a vehicle, it is a bit of a shame that it replaces such a wonderful, brilliant to drive old coupe. However, in and of itself, as I say, this is perfectly pleasant. It's actually quite nice to drive, surprisingly so. This is a very, very top spec version. It uses the 2-litre TSI turbocharged petrol engine, which is essentially the engine from the Golf GTI, albeit with a considerably less power in this form, 190 horsepower, as opposed to the Golf's 230. Still, it shifts along very nicely, and it's very, very smooth, very, very quiet, and not appallingly uneconomical. I mean, if you drove it more gently than I'm driving it here, you'd probably get quite decent economy out of it, in fact. And for the first few miles, it feels really, really good to drive. The steering is slick, the suspension and the chassis seem composed and assured. It all feels very, very nice indeed. However, when you get it to some seriously twisty roads, the car's SUV nature does rather take over. It's just not quite reactive enough. It does roll a bit, it does pitch a bit. You can feel the weight. This car weighs a not inconsiderable 1,400 kilograms. That's quite chunky, and you do feel it every time you come to a braking point for a tight corner. So while it's okay to drive, while it's actually in many ways quite fine to drive, it sure as heck ain't brilliant. Now, the styling, I guess we'll have to let you make up your own mind on. It's kind of attractive. It's certainly very chunky. It's certainly very distinctive. It's Volkswagen going for a very fashionable, fashion-conscious vibe. It's chunky and kind of interesting, but it's certainly not what you call really very pretty. And if you look around the back, where the rear wing meets the boot lid, meets the rear glass, meets the rear lights, meets the rear wheel, that's a bit of a jumble right there. There's a profusion of lines, not always starting anywhere logical nor finishing. The other problem is that because it's gone for this very fashionable design, because it's gone for this commitment to being trendy over being necessarily practical, there's a bit of a lack of space in the back. It's not bad. You can fit a 6-foot adult in the back seat, but when you do so, you are reaching the limits of what the T-Roc can do. Certainly there are similarly priced competitors, not least Seat's own Ateca, which are much more spacious in the back and indeed in the boot. So practical it ain't. Fashionable it is. You can get a diesel version. In fact, you can get more than one diesel version. We have tested the 150 horsepower diesel, which is absolutely fine. It's a bit rattly and a bit noisy, and you can feel the extra weight on the nose when it comes to the corners, but nonetheless it's a decent engine and a decent setup. I think that one of the other petrol engines available, either the little entry-level 1-litre TSI with 115 horsepower, or if that proves not up to the task of moving the T-Roc's bulk, then the new 1.5-litre TSI with 150 horsepower would probably end up being the best engines in the T-Roc range. The fact is that Volkswagen is going to make an absolute ton of these, and it's going to sell an absolute ton of these, because it's exactly the kind of car that, as far as anybody can tell, we all want right now. We all want an SUV. We all want one priced somewhere between 25 and 35,000 euro, and that's exactly where the T-Roc sits. And certainly we still seem to like the Volkswagen brand, in spite of all the brickbats that have been thrown at it over the past 2 years. With the diesel scandal, sales are on the up, both in Ireland and across the world. People still crave this brand. So I have a funny feeling they're going to crave this car just as much. I don't though. It's fine. It's okay. It does what it sets out to do. It does what it sets out to do quite well. But there's just a big part of me that can't accept a car that's designed to be fashionable, that's designed for the marketing department, when for the same money you could have a Seat Ateca, which isn't as pretty, isn't as trendy, but it's a damn sight more practical, and it's pretty much as good to drive, if not better. Or you could have a Volkswagen Golf Estate, which for the same money as a T-Roc is absolutely brilliant, has a much bigger boot, bigger back seat, better quality interior, and is much more fun to drive. That's the compromise you make. You go for the fashionable SUV, or you accept a lack of fashion, but a heap more practicality and a heap more usability. Personally, that's the way I'd go.